Beginning in the year 1985, bad blood first started brewing within the North Side folks, which began the background for what would later come as all ULO allied gangs would eventually split. In the year 1985, Imperial gangsters began to feud among themselves as Spaulding and Armitage IGs began conflicting with IGs from Kimball and Cortland. Imperial gangsters from Kimball and Cortland under the leadership of T-Bags were put together when they collaborated with Crazy Willie of the Spanish Cobras to open a section together known as Cobra Gangsters or CGs. This did not sit well with IGs from Spaulding and Armitage, so Fat Jose from the Spaulding and Armitage IGs worked with Pee Wee of the Maniac Latin Disciples to create the Gangster Disciples or GDs, no relation to the Gangster Disciples gang. This was a brief war that resulted in the SGD board stepping in to resolve this issue in 1986. Even though this was resolved, it started the beginning of bitterness between the ULO allies. As a result of this, Talman and Wabanja MLDs were formed and Western and Cortez Imperial Gangsters were formed in the aftermath. As a result of the resolve in 1986, Pol D went on to found Talman and Wabanja MLDs, which became a legendary section of MLDs. Starting in 1987, newer Spanish Cobras and Latin Disciples did not get along as well as the older members of each gang. Fist fights would break out and other kinds of drama between both gangs that older members completely avoided. Instead, the older members organized the conflicts. The older members would bring the younger members into a schoolyard and let them have a big brawl to get all the frustrations out. Then, after that, there was peace. It was sort of like being a parent having young siblings that don't get along. Make them fight it out and then shake hands afterward. This was a great way of keeping YLO/ULO folks intact, but it was still concerning that the younger members of Cobras and Disciples were having these conflicts to begin with, but for these next 5 years this is how conflicts were effectively resolved. In 1989, the relations with Maniacs were mostly tight as only the usual skirmishes among the younger members were the worst thing to happen with fellow folks. Things got very serious in 1989 when an argument happened at a party with the Western and Cortez Imperial Gangsters. One of the MLDs got into it with Flaco G of the Imperial Gangsters, and this led to the MLD shooting Flaco G dead at the party. Angry feelings ensued, but a war was not initiated as an agreement was reached. The real anger came months later when another MLD shot and killed another Imperial gangster, and the IGs threatened war if MLDs did not turn over the shooter. The MLDs refused, and this started a very nasty war between Maniac Latin Disciples and Imperial gangsters. This became the first major folk against folk war on the northern part of the city. The war with the Western and Cortez Imperial gangsters was nasty over the next 2 years as several shootings went down between them. Very frequently Western and Cortez Imperial gangsters would take shots at MLDs right after school at nearby Roberto Clemente High School. This led to Flintstone G of the Imperial gangsters making an attempted assassination until he ran out of bullets. Then he ran home and cut through the gangway at Augusta and Cortez where an MLD was waiting in the alley for him and shot him dead. At about New Year's Eve of 1991, going into 1992, the Imperial Gangster and Maniac Latin Disciple War ended for the time being. In 1992, the skirmishes between Insanes and Maniacs became even more frequent, and it boiled into the first major war between Cobras and Disciples as a series of shootouts happened for 2 days straight that was bad enough to make it on the news. The war was stopped once older members put an end to it. Another bad incident happened in April of 1992 when MLDs accused Orlando of the Spanish Cobras of selling them bad drugs. MLDs swiftly got vengeance by shooting Orlando to death, which started a major riot in the streets between Cobras and Disciples that went on for 2 days and even made the news. The Kedzie and Barry MLDs were the ones involved on the Disciple side. The guns blazed all around Logan Square for those 2 days as both gangs were hitting each other hard back and forth until it was resolved. In the aftermath of the 1992 war, the Insane and Maniac families made their organizations more official than ever before and intensified the divide. Now Cobras went by Insane Spanish Cobra while Latin Disciples now went by Maniac Latin Disciple at all times. This divide now caused their allies to back up Cobras or Maniacs whenever there was violence going on against each other. Another group splintered out of ULO known as the Almighty Alliance. The Simon City Royals, insane popes, Latin eagles and imperial gangsters went that route. Before 1992, being a Maniac Latin Disciple was more of a title for older members and was the rank, but now Maniac was fully part of the name for the whole nation, even the younger members. In the year 1993, Maniac Latin Disciples opened a section in the Wicker Park neighborhood for the first time in the Ashland and Beach area known as Ghost Town. This section would survive until the mid-2010s and was a deep section for some time until police pressure caused the section to close. In November of 1993, the friction between Maniacs and Insanes boiled over some more after conflict exploded at a party at a corner house at California and Cortez in the East Humboldt Park neighborhood. The Spanish Cobras and all their insane family allies decided to throw a massive party that went into the late hours of the night. The party was mainly thrown by Spanish Cobras, YLO Cobras, Insane Campbell Boys and Insane Dragons. A live DJ was spinning that night and a dance floor was full of activity as the DJ spun away into the night while everyone was drinking and having a good time. As the night progressed, Maniac Latin Disciples from Thomas and Washtenaw, Murder Town MLDs, heard about the party since they were just a few blocks away. The disciples felt they had ownership of California and Cortez and figured they can crash any party they want at any time, and that's exactly what happened. These MLDs came to the party uninvited and began dancing on the dance floor in cocky way while waving pistols in the air and showing them off. All the Insanes were bothered right away by this cocky behavior and began griping to each other about how it was disrespectful, but these MLDs felt it was disrespectful to have a party in their territory without an invite. Some main members of the Spanish Cobras now gathered at the doorway, which prompted one of the MLDs to act even more cocky while waving his pistol around. The Cobras then threatened the MLDs, and this prompted MLDs to gather reinforcements of their own and from allies. The Cobras followed suit. Soon several members of the Spanish Cobras, YLO Cobras, Insane Dragons and Insane Campbell Boys gathered with guns in hand on one side of the street, while several Maniac Latin Disciples, YLO Disciples, Maniac Campbell Boys and Latin Jivers gathered on the opposite side of the street with guns in hand too. Both sides gathered up while hurling insults and shouting at each other until there were about 150 gang members on each side of the street on each side, totaling 300 gang members in total. By 3:30 in the morning, the shouting conflict got violent as the guns started sparking and a violent gunfight ensued that last 5 minutes. One of the Insane Dragons even began firing an Uzi at the Maniacs. Store windows were being shot to pieces and cars roved the intersection doing drive-by shootings at the crowds. The scene was total anarchy and chaos to the point that the Chicago police were too scared to show up. The crowds soon dispersed as they continued to blast at each other, and this broke the violence into pockets all around the vicinity as you could hear gunshots echoing from all around. It took the police nearly an hour to show up just after the Insane Dragons made another trip thundering down California looking for more MLDs to shoot at. Several people were shot that night and the bad blood was becoming worse between Maniacs and Insanes. However, surprisingly, after this gun battle, peace came back upon the Maniacs and Insanes.